Hello, everyone. We hope you've had a pleasant, beautiful day so far. I am architect Ranim Hamad, a member of the Arcnode team. We were established in 2016 in the University of Petra in Amman, Jordan. Since then, we've organized over 120 events for designs and architecture students and enthusiasts. Our motto is aspire to inspire, and here to inspire us today is a special guest, an amazing architect and a controversial theorist who is moving forward towards the future with vision and ambition to make a positive change. Today we have Patrik Schumacher. He is also a close friend of our beloved Zaha Hadid and the design principal of Zaha Hadid Architects. He studied philosophy and mathematics at the Friedrich Wilhelm University in Bonn, and then studied architecture in Stuttgart and continued his studies at London South Bank University. In 1988, still a student, he joined the design studio of Zaha Hadid, and in 1999 he completed his PhD at the Institute of Cultural Science, Klagenfurt University, and completed his PhD afterwards. He is internationally recognized for his theoretical arguments and for highlighting new visions and approaches theoretically and through practice. He declared parametricism as a movement by defining the main principles of his approach. He wrote an impressive book of 1,000 pages discussing geometry and the changing of our social interactions through buildings and urbanism. Being here with us today, Mr. Schumacher, it is an amazing opportunity to pay tribute to your close friend and partner, to the pride of Iraq and the entire Arab world, Zaha Hadid. Growing up in Baghdad, surrounded by the richness of history and natural beauty of Iraq, little did she know she was growing up to be the queen of the curve, the first female Pritzker Award winner, the AIA superstar, the first and only woman to be awarded the Gold Royal Medal from the Royal Institute of British Architects, and to be honored by the Queen Elizabeth herself for her services in architecture. She used her iconic artistic sense to break the boundaries and to reveal new ways of thinking, either through her tectonic paintings and the understanding of suprematism. Her creativity did not only imply in architecture, but rather spread to other design fields such as fashion, furniture, interiors, and art pieces. Zaha left her footprint on the sand of the time. Her architecture is forever recognized. Not only she inspired like an entire generation of young architects worldwide, but she is the best example of a female power, and that with creativity, hard work, and fearlessness, you can achieve anything. An icon and legend that shall forever be missed. Before we begin our lecture, I would like to introduce two architects from Iraq, the homeland of Zaha Hadid. We have architect Dima Al Yahya, a Tamayuz Award winner for the year of 2018, and architect and planner, architect Iba Al Zubaydi, who has a master's degree in spatial planning for the German Jordanian University. Her thesis, which discusses the transplaced communities, was chosen to be presented and published at the 8th Annual International Conference on Urban Studies and Planning in Athens, Greece, 2018. They will be joining our discussion today. Mr. Patrik, the floor is all yours.
Okay. 1 second, please. I will share my screen in a few minutes, okay? Wait, I need to bring this bigger. Can everybody see me? Am I still on there? Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. I don't know who is in the audience, but I've prepared a special lecture. We're gathering together a lot of the schemes and projects and sketches and competition entries we've done for the Arab world. Wow. Some of them you might know, some of them are most probably not known to anybody. It even includes a number of mosque designs I wanted to show as well and share with you guys. So I'm very curious about getting feedback on what you think about this approach to the Islamic world, Arab world. Some of them is very contemporary and maybe a part of a global style. Of course, all of it is parametricism, but some of it has a certain regional flavor. So I've also been talking about parametric regionalism as a way to approach sometimes architecture in the Middle East, but we also have done that in China and regions that are very proud and have a very strong tradition one can't ignore and sometimes feels inspired to participate in. You know that Zaha Hadid was very much of a modernist in spirit, a futurist modernist, and very much connected up with the international scene and considered architecture to be a global language, a global discourse, which I believe as well. But she also, of course, has roots, and the calligraphy of the fluidity and calligraphy of her hand became translated. That wasn't particular to Arab architecture, but you can see later on in some of the works that we tried to affiliate and fit into context, not only based on climate and engineering aspects, but literally also cultural and aesthetically. So that will be the theme of my talk today. I don't know how long it will take. I think I might take about 45 minutes, perhaps. There's a lot of visuals. If they come through nicely, and then we shall discuss what that might mean, if there is only global architecture or there are regional architectures, or maybe there's a global style which has regional versions. So that will be the discussion perhaps later. So with that little preface, let me see if I can, first of all, share my screen. Aha. Oh, yeah.
Okay, nice.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to start with this image of Zaha. I mean, that's the way I met her when I joined her studio in the late 80s. Maybe this picture is maybe from 1990, 1991, where she was sitting in her, at the time, a Muse house, very small house in London, but already surrounded by her own creations.
Yeah.
So you can see that she had a very kind of strong sense of aesthetic self-projection through her work, through her own persona. So this elegance, which you see here, is going through her whole oeuvre, all our works, aspiring to that sense of beauty, fluidity, elegance you find in her own persona. So I wanted to start. I suspect nobody would know this project. This is actually in Morocco, a sketch and scheme, a competition entry for a new concert hall / opera house, the Grand Theater for Casablanca. And you can see kind of multi-layered ground, and you can see two volumes. You enter the corner, and then projection two theaters were located on either side. So that's just a few sketches. We lost this competition, but soon later there was another. This project actually never happened, and then there was a decision made to move the opera house to Rabat, and I'll show you later that we actually won that scheme.
Amazing.
Some glimpses, but also, I mean, this is a time when the Middle East had this fantastic, I would say, renaissance. In the wake of Dubai was the pioneer, I think, nation that modernized in the Middle East, and showed that the Arab world could could kind of compete at the highest level with respect with the first world modern city and society. And so at the peak of the boom period leading up to the 2008 collapse, if you like, those few years were amazing. So we won the competition for Dubai Opera House, and there is a hotel in the foreground. On the left is the opera house, and this was one of the most spectacular designs we created. I'm not showing the actual hall here, but lobby spaces and the top fantastic room on top of the theater, etc. So this has been a while ago, and Abu Dhabi next door was also pushing forward. This is actually something which might still happen. This is Saadiyat Island. In the meantime, they've built the Louvre, and there's also a new Guggenheim in planning, a Foster building, and this was the biggest of all the new icons in Saadiyat Island. We won the competition for concert hall or performing arts center with 6 different venues. A great atrium we put forward, and it was the most extreme design with all these terraces, cantilevers, and structures, but also with a fantastic high-level glazed concert hall, because in concerts you don't need to have a dark space, you don't need a typical kind of theater enclosure, and you could have that concert in the bright daylight, if you like, and that is our proposal right at the top of that project. Now, this one some of you might know because this is Petra, and you can see here our interpretation of some of these beautiful erosion forms, and later on you see also this form reoccurring, and this idea of canyons and strata and erosion became the theme for our proposal for the Grand Theatre of Amman. So this is also a concert hall project with 2 halls, and here you can see that big block in the valley, beautifully located, with that fantastic carve out erosion of that big stone block, which generated a lot of interesting lobby spaces. And in this case, we have actually a smaller concert hall up here and a bigger concert hall partly submerged here, but therefore the high-level lobby with Skylight. So these are the competition sketches. We won the competition, and the tragedy is we've developed that in all drawings and details and 3D models all the way ready for construction when the Arab Spring political uprisings happened, and it seemed no longer appropriate to do. So this was cancelled. I'm not sure if it is cancelled forever, but the drawings are ready. I mean, it's literally ready to be tendered.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, Zaha was very sad and devastated.
Oh.
It's just so sad when if you do a competition, you lose is one thing, but if we spend kind of 2 years of refining and detailing, working it all up, that's another set of drawings we don't have time to look at, but this would have been the main hall, and this would have been the lobby and the balcony into the second little hall, and you kind of work yourself down. There's a sunken concert hall, which I showed you earlier, and this is when looking from the top level down, these fantastic lobby spaces. So big shame, but a lot of these you'll see more of these. The Dubai Opera House was also a shame because we had developed that a lot. Saadiyat Island as well. So a lot of these didn't happen. Some of them might still happen, like Saadiyat Island. This one finally is happening now. This is then the Grand Theatre of Rabat, beautifully located on the water. Rabat is a very beautiful garden city. You can see here that we have main lobby entrance. We have terraces to step out on from the balconies, and we have actually, you'll see here, the stage also can kind of open up to the back, and we have the idea of an amphitheater connected up as well.
Wow.
So this is happening. In this case, the theater itself very faceted. I don't have latest photos. It's what I'm showing you now is construction photos. And actually, we're a bit further ahead now, actually, with that. And so there's a mixture of fair-face concrete for these long ramps and structures, and then the cladding is fiber concrete happening as you can see it here. The lobby space with a series of balconies and the great theater space. So that will take a little further months, and I don't know, maybe over a year to be finally completed. Yeah, it will be beautiful on the water. I just threw this in as well because it's the football stadium in Qatar. And so that was the competition design, sketches, the reality. So the beautifully pleated cladding in white aluminum, very beautiful, very striking. And of course, it's a big opening, but we can cover that roof. You can see the cables, and you can pull over roof elements there to close it for the heat. I've been at, there was a kind of opening ceremony and initial football game already, and you can see here the kind of nice pleating and the mashrabiyah patterns in the at the edge for the lobby area. So. But we did also further a sports complex and cultural complexes in the region, in the Gulf area. So this is, for instance, a swimming pool with 2 pools and training centers, etc. I just threw it in as well. I'm not sure if you would. I mean, it's part of a kind of semi-Middle Eastern country, Azerbaijan, where you have also as a Muslim country as well. I just threw this in, but it's not going to go into detail because that's obviously very well known. But it's one of those projects out of this period of the years in the early 2000s where we developed this kind of repertoire of projects, which then finally got built and beautifully executed. So we also did a number of government projects. So this was the idea of a whole new government complex in Libya. I mean, what I find interesting, what happened in Libya and Morocco and Jordan and also Algeria, Tunis as well, all of North Africa, I thought had a fantastic economic spring before the so-called Arab Spring, where there's a lot of ambition and investment. In fact, this was after the financial crisis, which in a way stopped all the boom in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, in particular Dubai, or everything came to a halt there. But that was a takeoff moment for North Africa, and there's a lot of excitement. And unfortunately, and with I call it the real Arab Spring, and then you had a kind of political Arab Spring which stopped all of that. So this is Tripoli in Libya. The idea of a whole government complex. This was meant to be the parliament, a big dome, and there was a big plate with connecting a lot of these ministry buildings, and these were other chambers of the parliament, and these towers were all the ministries. So in this whole kind of a garden city with that network structure tied together in a kind of arabesque patterning is also structural. I think I don't have the image of the dome, beautiful dome project. So at the same time, the similar time frame, the Iraqi central bank was worked out. I think it's a very beautiful project which is on site. So this will finally happen. And you can see here the idea to have that narrow base around the beautiful courtyard podium. And in that very solid part, that's where you actually have the cash vault and the gold vault. And then it opens up with an atrium. You can see here, you can have panoramic elevators. And then these structures, the facade, and you can see it down here, is all about shading. And in the end, totally shading against the southern light, totally open with the northern light, and then having the opening up gradually. And this is also beautiful, the way you move through the podium and see this tower up. So I think it's a wonderful tower, and make you forward to its final execution. But we also did a number of sketches for the Iraqi Parliamentary complex on the outskirts with a beautiful garden, and it's a part of a master plan and has a series of office buildings and a number of parliamentary chambers. There's also 2 main chambers, but also secondary halls. And that is our sketch using these domes. And you can see here in a larger envelope a series of smaller volumes articulating the different chambers and using filtered light. And this is the way you look at it from the office buildings behind, overlooking the parliamentary chamber. We also did in Iraq again a competition. I only have one image here. This was on the river as well, on the Tigris. The offices of the Prime Minister. So it was central executive government, and we treated it like a palace. So with the traditional C-shaped configuration towards the river, and then a series of secondary buildings, but we made that quite fluid and fragmented. So there is a broken symmetry, very light, with these kind of lightweight shells. So something which has some of the axiality and elegance of the government complex. It has traditional features. It also has a very contemporary lightness of efficient shell structures. And so we did a number of those government buildings. So this was for proposal for a parliamentary building also for Dubai. And it's also built on this idea of layers of shells. And sometimes you find in mosque a whole field of shells and a kind of hierarchy and cascade of those overhanging to the side, so that to give a lot of shading to multi-story building, multi-story offices behind, and a beautiful main plenary hall with these kind of layered structures. So we've done a number of those. We've done this one. We've done one for Tripoli, and I couldn't find now the actual hall. And we've done it's a beautiful one for Syria. From Syria, I can show you the complex from the outside, but all of them also had the beautiful interior hall. So this is the Syrian Parliament building which we proposed. So it's there's an existing small Parliament building which we connect up to. This was the ministry offices in the slab, a series of courtyards, series of chambers around, and this was a big dome hosting the actual parliamentary. You can see how small this one was, a hall, and then also covering a lobby area in front. Unfortunately, all of these projects didn't happen and might come back. And this was the great hall of, in Libya under Gaddafi, you had a system of direct democracy. So this was a congress similar what you would find in China, for instance, where you have direct delegates coming together to a major annual congress with 5,000 delegates. So there's a very large, and we have other versions of that. So I just wanted to show you out of my archive what we've done in all of these countries in that what I call the real Arab Spring, which and now make a political statement, which kind of finished, or in a sense spoiled by an impatient uprisings. We actually had waited a little bit more. You could have seen prosperity spreading around. But of course, it was an era where you had investment flowing in, and initially, of course, not everybody was participating, and built up some tension. But we had wonderful projects and ambitions, and a lot of people, you know, from these countries who have been educated in the West, who've gone to America, who've gone to UK and London at that point, were coming back to their countries, trying to develop. I also wanted to show something which we did at the time is the Louvre opened a new kind of wing, the Islamic Museum within the Louvre, and we made that was our competition proposal. Egypt was one of those cases as well, where we were heavily involved with a number of projects. We had the Tower on the Nile, which I'm showing you later, and this was Expo City. So it's a big exhibition center, including with hotel towers and conference centers in the center of Egypt, Cairo, relatively central, close to this kind of city of the so-called city of the dead, because there's an old cemetery with a lot of smaller pavilion-like buildings which are actually inhabited now in a kind of quasi-shanty town next to this in the center of Cairo. I think it was a very interesting project because what you can see and what you're happening in Cairo at the moment, or has been the old center was kind of falling apart, and a lot of the affluent classes and business moved out to generate new Cairo. And this was still a commitment in investing into so-called old Cairo. And this is some of the images of the Expo City. And again, this was already, it was a real project, commissioned, developed beyond the competition. And at the same time, we did in Egypt stone towers. So this is part of New Cairo. A very large complex of towers was meant to house a lot of multinational corporations and also local firms. It was a hotel included, as well as residences, but mostly office headquarter cluster in New Cairo. So, and the typology is quite interesting. Always two of these slabs come together around an atrium, and there's a small gap and another two. And all together this generates this beautiful frontage. And then as you step behind, you move through, you're in the sunken valley. So we went down a number of levels to gain height, gain area, and generate this wonderful valley. And there's a lot of retail in there as well, a hotel and a lot of office spaces. So there's kind of sunken plaza condition in that valley, in that inside, with ramps and balconies and a lot of outdoor space. So this was at the time the largest project we've ever had. This would nearly amount to 1 million square meter. So this was on a scale we only operating otherwise in China, where we do very large projects. And you can see how far we actually cascaded down to gain height and area. So this didn't happen, but unfortunately we got something off the ground in Beirut. This is a beautiful American University of Beirut, where Zaha was actually herself a student in the around 1970. She was studying mathematics here, and this is a beautiful program because it's the Ferris Institute of Political Science. And it's a beautiful, I don't have a lot of interiors, but there's actually a sunken terrace up here and a series of beautiful open offices also in the shaft, and a nice kind of cantilevering building. Abu Dhabi Bridge, the third crossing. I don't have photos here, I just have the renderings, but of course that's been completed for a long time. And this is maybe one of the projects where we've spent the most intense of our design efforts ever. This is the Green Hill of Algiers, Nigeria. This is the presidential palace. Actually, the presidential palace is up here right now, so this would have been the new presidential palace and the presidential residence, separated by a garden, a big ceremonial forecourt, and another cluster of ministry towers. So it's a major complex and beautiful palace with major, large, big halls and a lot of spaces. You can see it here as well. Now, this is something where we went all out on a more ornamental approach, but these are also high-tech, lightweight concrete or super thin concrete shells, but everything heightened to become a kind of beautiful, festive, ornate structures, because the ribbing pattern, which was structurally active, was at the same time also became an ornament. So some of these are very large shells, and we left gaps between them, which gained some to get light into these also at the middle, not only at the edges. And this structure is the presidential residence. I don't have details of that, but this was some of the approaches. You can see here some of these very ornamental treatment of the interior and exterior. We had the idea there's going to be light windows, but also tiling and different color tiles and different patterns on the inside. Big atrium, multi-level atrium, with this beautiful feature of the column moving through a hole, and this kind of cluster columns you find in Gothic cathedrals. So this was an unbelievable effort in terms of 3D complexity. And again, some of the cruder earlier versions of some of the spaces show you how we try to vary the tectonic elements, but as always the ribbing flowing and channeling the forces to the support points. You want to generate a sense of lightness, and then also in terms of the big glass areas, the reinforcement was following a geometric pattern. Looking at it from the back side, from the vista of the, so the residence had also a beautiful top level courtyard. So this is some of the kind of analysis and the different types of vaulting and ribbing we generated to have a different degrees of festivity, different degrees of importance, from simpler patterns to more elaborate patterns. And this is about the facade, so the facade overhang, the relief of the facade structure, and then as well shading elements. You can see some of those spaces and the main hall, the way the shells were connected with glass. And this is the main atrium, circulatory atrium. So we went all out. Every single room was detailed in this way. That's including some of the furniture. This is a big conference table. And we detailed it out with the concrete shells, with the cladding, the glazing, everything ready to go as well. Unfortunately, the president passed away, and also when in his later years when he was very kind of ailing, we never got the go-ahead with construction.
Sadly.
Yes. So one more of those. Now I just want to show you also a few towers. So we have proposed actually this one in Tehran, North Tehran. I mean, unfortunately, in Tehran, the political conditions are not very good, and Iran is facing a lot of sanctions and restrictions. So we couldn't do this one. We want another major tower complex, also in Tehran, and so we did this when there was a window for a short period where there wasn't any sanctions. And that's a private client. It's very close to a beautiful park next to the Russian embassy in northern Tehran. And this is actually going ahead. This is happening. So it's a very tight side, a very steep side. It's a hotel and residences and a kind of retail podium, which will go forward. Our other Iranian project didn't happen. In this one, we also was difficult to stay on top of it, so we're relying also on local execution, and we can't receive any money from Iran, so it's a little bit wait and see whether we will actually, it will be true to our design or not, whether we actually can own up to the project or not. This is one of those casualties of the financial crisis 2008. So this is the dancing towers in Dubai. We also designed the, don't have an image for that, the stock exchange. This is a few more towers we created. So this is a tower for Qatar. It's kind of interesting tower where we had cores at the edge and bridging across. And then in the center, we pulled out, I'm not sure if that's clear, we had more depth in the center. So we came with kind of diamond curtain or diamond glass. And then we put, instead of a podium, we made a sunken podium because we don't like the podium to obscure the tower. There's a proposal for Qatar. This was a proposal, it's actually directly on the Nile in Cairo. Very, very narrow site for a beautiful hotel. There's a cantilevering ballroom and also a sunken lobby. I don't have more images of that. And this was an eco tower, green tower in Azerbaijan, and another tower in another Middle Eastern country. I forgot. Most probably this was Abu Dhabi. So we've done a number of schemes, and then we've done many more. And the way it goes with firms like ours, what we're building and what gets known to the outside world is just the kind of tip of the iceberg of our work. There are many, many more projects we've done for Qatar, for Saudi Arabia. I mean, concepts for Abu Dhabi, etc. This is the one you know has happened. A beautiful research center in Riyadh, the King Abdullah Center. And I just wanted to show this the models we created, and you can see already here that the tilted courtyards shade against the south and bring in light and capture the wind as well. And then we have the similar features with the canopies. So this was the idea of keeping out the light and bringing in the wind into these courtyards, and then stagger them in height. And then the similar tilting of the oculus of all the shading elements so that the wind flows in and the sun stays out. And so this unifies the image across the tensile structures and the solid structures. And every perimeter facade is very kind of, has deep cut small windows. So all of these are also windows, but you will not have any solar gain reaching into the buildings through that. So I think it's a very successful project. I've been back a number of times, gave a lecture there. We had the Saudi Design Week event here as well. So it's become a major public building in Riyadh.
Wonderful.
So this is some of the entrance situations. So that's where you can drive in, drop off, kind of open with a skylight for the entrance situation. This is where you walk in between some of those volumes underneath the canopies. I'm posing here, so you can see that some light is coming through.
Very nice picture.
Thank you. And it's so nice. So this is also kind of tensile. It also says so. This is a very kind of geometric building, but you can see the climate imposes something which makes it regional in a way, and also the use of tents and tensile structures makes it kind of localizes it. So that's kind of parametric regionalism, but also it's tectonism in the sense that it is driven by environmental engineering logics, which impose them, let's say, parameters to translate those pressures of sun and wind into the morphology. So that's what I call tectonism as well. So it's not only form making, it's form finding on the basis of, for instance, structural logic sometimes when we do the skeleton buildings, but also environmental logics, fabrication logics. So it's a beautiful outdoor spaces. So they get a lot of ventilation through this, through all the openings in the roof, but also the gaps between the building, and a lot of shading.
Yeah.
It works very well. We were happy with that result. And then inside you also have these courtyards, and so they're also very useful to bring lights on a very deep structure, and also to step out, to get some fresh air sometimes. And we have a lot of atria as well. So some of these shapes are covered courtyards, atria, or they are outdoor spaces you can step into, like this. So these are the outdoor courtyards, quite beautiful. And we also have a religious space. So we have office spaces, we have a conference center, a library, and we have the prayer hall as well. So I wanted to show you a number of mosque designs.
Oh, wow.
And the idea here is to have something which is uplifting, beautiful, like a religious space of contemplation and prayer should be, but also and uses traditional, features maybe, and things like domes, but it's also very contemporary. So it's a kind of 21st century vision of a mosque for modernized Islam, and so that was our contribution. So, but the typologies are of course very typical, with a forecourt with a series of, let's say, arcades, and then the main prayer hall. So this some of the model sketches. We generate different versions of that, and this is the way it was located, and I think it's in Dubai. The courtyard, the main hall, and a lot of shaded zones, and there's this kind of approach obliquely on a kind of at an angle with a water feature. And so this side could be totally open to come in. There was also a minaret, and so it's the main axial view, and the way you step in. And then it's a kind of beautiful main prayer hall with a lot of light and this kind of mashrabiyya kind of curtain at the bottom.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very much.
So this is, I show you a few versions of this. We tried very hard to win this over. In the end, we didn't get it. So we did a number of schemes because we thought, So this was the first one. Still some details. And we thought this kind of light is kind of like a light breaking through the clouds.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So and then we did the second version, which was more solid. Was actually where you can see the grain maybe of a brick or stone, and it was using parametric methodology to develop all the geometries. A very similar diagram, but different, let's say, architectural articulation. And we can have a double minaret. So this is another version. A bit more austere and simple with the edge and dome. This idea with trying out the lighting at the bottom of these columns. There's a kind of weaving column pattern, which became kind of generate the solid edge. A similar diagram, and also I think very pretty as well, with some openings as well to bring light, and with the water feature surrounding, and you can see this kind of intersecting lace of structures which generates the way the kind of pointed arches which originated in the Islamic architecture and became also the feature of the Gothic.
Yeah.
And this is the idea of these kind of layered stone pieces. So it was a material idea of this. And that's the way the open arcades feed into the closed edge of the prayer hall. And this is the main dome hall. And some detail of the idea of using stone, layers of stone. So they didn't like those yet. They wanted more. So we did a third option, which was this kind of beautiful, pure kind of well, slightly pulled dome with the kind of looks like a kind of Saturn with this kind of ribbon or arcade piece as a big oval with a lot of depth here, and a slightly smaller courtyard, but there was a lot of light coming through here. And this is the way it was sitting on the axis, and I think it's very pretty. We also worked out the detail. You can see here these four elements carried by one very slender column, and then there was between two of these columns one free-floating cluster of 4 cells, and this whole thing was rising towards us here, and then the dome. It's a very lacy, elegant piece. And also kind of with a lot of calligraphy on the whole wall, and then the structure filtering through.
Stunning.
Okay. Some of the details, and then we also looked at the lighting pouring through. There was through the perforations as well. So that's, still parametric regionalism, and but hoping to have that beauty and also become recognizably a mosque for also more traditional users. So this is a slightly more unusual version. This is actually in Pristina, which is Kosovo, former Yugoslavia. Sorry. This is later. This is actually the Albania, Tirana. Sorry, I have the Pristina later. And this was a complex site, and it's a kind of unusual form. And we generated a courtyard, and you'll see where this part became also a mosque, a very unusual mosque. I think it was Mecca in this direction. So you'll show you later how this works with the minaret, and something really like an urban block. And this is the prayer hall here. At the corner, a lobby space, multi-level lobby, and that's the idea of the prayer hall. So this is some of the balconies, and this is the idea of that hall, which is kind of wedge shape, and then behind again the kind of quite contemporary feeling circulation space. So that shape is very unusual for prayer hall. Now this is Pristina, Kosovo. You can. It's a very messy city. Well, like many cities are around the world, all cities nearly. And here you can see a little bit. I'm sure you can see that the minaret and the mosque. It's an urban density. You're coming closer, and so the idea was kind of a fluid. You start with a big dome, which is made out of many smaller domes, and then they kind of pour out, they melt out to invite people in and to create these kind of arcade-like structures. And this is another one, and you can actually pass through here. So this becomes nearly like a bazaar or public space as well. So this is the idea of these domes. So you can have columns, the minaret, and some elevational views of this. So it's like a swarm, quite like a swarm formation of smaller domes clustered, and you get light into it through these. The physical model we created at the time, 3D printed. So it's kind of semi-traditional. That's again is a kind of parametric version of a swarm of domes. So you have recognizability. There's also contemporary feeling to this whole place. From the top, quite sketchy at that time still. You generate these kind of domes and carved out with courtyards, and that's the way you approach it. These sketches are actually earlier than what you showed you earlier, the more developed forms of the Dubai Mosque. So this was nearly becoming a bazaar as well, connected up with that. And this is the prayer hall, very, very the balconies. So you get all the features in there, very fluid, very rich. So enough of that. So that was the kind of the some of the religious projects we did. I mean, mosques. We have actually done more. We've done even one in a European city, and we had done an earlier version in we've done in Europe sometimes, in France one, and one in a sketch for one in Scandinavia. This is happening in Riyadh. I'm sure you're aware of that. This is the metro station. From the airport, the main just stop at the new CBD cluster. So this is the idea of these kind of dune forms, and then the kind of ripples on the dune as a reference. You get these great windows, and there's a lot of shading but also a lot of light. So it's a bit like railway station, which used to have these fantastic vaults and a lot of light coming in. And here that light can only be coming more laterally because it's too hot for direct light. And then inside you will have these big windows and these very big multi-story spaces. And the trains are coming in also at high levels. This is the overall steel structure. And we did the tracks and the escalators aligned with the structure. So these kind of diagonals are both circulatory and structural. We didn't want any vertical columns. And that's the way we detailed out these beautiful swarms of windows. This is me visiting the site halfway through. We're much further ahead now, nearly finished on the outside. And some of the spaces on the inside, the kind of platform, the canyons of light, the diagonal structures. It's going to be amazing, kind of 21st century railway station, but it's a multi-level metro with 6 lines coming in and out. And very tall atria as well. So it's very complex. It's all GRC cladded steel, and on the inside it's GRG. So we've perfected the technique. This is a very large atrium, and sometimes we perforate the surfaces so you can actually also get light and vistas through. You can see here, these are actually perforated, semi-transparent. You'll see that later, like you see it now. Some more renderings and okay, so looking forward to the opening at the end of the year, and there will be a kind of G20 event inaugurating that.
We hope so.
Yeah. Yes. Well, maybe there's a slight delay because of COVID or so. So this is something also very beautiful, which we run the competition. This is, you know, in Riyadh, you have the old city Diriyah, which was this fantastic mud or clay built traditional city, and they're renovating that and making that a tourist attraction. Saudi Arabia used to be very secluded, that you only had business travelers, and even we, for many years, we never went to Saudi. Recent times, I've been many times, and they're opening up. So this is part of that. So this is a museum and visitor center for Diriyah, and it's sitting at the edge. It has, we wanted to be contemporary. It's kind of dune formation. It has the big kind of roof garden and these big, let's say, terraced gardens where you can step out of it, also filtering the light, and otherwise it's relatively solid, but it's all louvered to filter the light into the, because it has also office space, not only exhibition spaces. It has seminar rooms, it has a restaurant, and we've detailed it with these. So there's a steel frame structure, and then these are solid louver elements which span all the way up without getting any connection. So it's quite well detailed, and then at the ground you have a lot of the public spaces. So we call these kind of hanging gardens, or suspended oasis spaces up in that. And then we developed a lot the interior with this beautiful atrium staircase, and there's also the ground floor is following the topography, so it's not flat. So we have this kind of terraced lobby, and it follows up. There's an auditorium which is half open, which is also quite nice. So you get some intimacy, but it's still people can participate from the outside. There's no separation. And some detail of that. And there's a skylight above that staircase feature, which is at the same time a structure. So it's a kind of concrete structural element, which is at the same time the atrium and staircase. So. Okay, nearly getting there. So this is and Diriam, we don't know yet. They now we can't have that site. We're gonna looking for a new site, but everything is ready to go. So this is not only this is a fully detailed project, and this one is a wonderful project in Sharjah for the kind of wastewater management and waste management company, public company, and it's out in the desert, so there's nothing else here for a while. Later on, we actually work on a master plan. We will build around that, but right now we have the beautiful silhouette of the building against the horizon and literally nothing else but kind of the dunes, soft sand dunes, and then our building fitting in. We have water features and visitor centers, and so the visitor center, so the public elements, a lot of water features, and then an office building with the courtyard. We can actually cross over and step out into protected courtyard with beautiful skylights, and there's a double height or double level lobby, and the executive level is up here. So this is the courtyard I was talking about. This is the skylight for the open office plan. And this is some of the images under construction. There's a fair-face concrete dome lifting this up. A big window here. Yeah, and then so it's a steel structure, steel and concrete, and then fiber concrete cladding. In these joints, we will have a little LED, so they're going to be beautiful, soft light coming out of the surface as well. That's further ahead now. It's nearly finished now as well. Some of the renderings of similar to the DRAM project, so the big dome, the staircase up, the balcony, the big glass, and then some of the images of that dome. So some of them will have lighting features integrated, and this is the silhouette of the building from the outside. Finally, it just shows, so we also, I mean, we don't, so I think, again, this project has Arabesque features, it works with the landscape, so it is regionally specific. And finally, Dubai, we felt always it makes maybe less sense. Dubai is a very global city, so we're doing a kind of global iconic building. We just want to finish with that because we just finished that project, which was the only project that survived the 2008 crisis. So we started that in the boom era of 2006, 7, whatever, and the only one which wasn't stopped, but at kind of very small steps and slow steps, we finally got this project finished. It's a very interesting, complex, multi-use. So there will be apartments up here. There's most of it is offices. There's a hotel, service apartments. There's retail. So it's an interesting mixed-use building with a nice facade. So you get this kind of beautiful facade with kind of soft silver fritting to play with light reflection, and also with interesting LED lights in the surface here. An atrium, and I think it's quite successful and iconic. It's very close to the Burj Dubai.
Okay.
And so we don't compete on height, we compete on kind of originality and beauty, perhaps.
I've seen this, it's amazing.
It's quite nice, isn't it?
Amazing.
Yeah. So there's some of these photos are beautiful, yeah. And so the hotel is very nice. So the lobby is very nice. So this here you will be underneath that hole, and you can look through it up into the overall space. And it's a nice multi-level lobby. And we created the interiors, these kind of islands to hang around in. There will be also a small space celebrating Zaha's work. So there will be a little small Zaha museum as well. Some of the details. And it's beautiful that we can, in our projects, oftentimes, and we always aspire to this, do everything from the envelope to the spaces to the detailing of the interior surfaces as well as furnishings. And that's also with respect to the rooms. So I leave you with that. Maybe I stop sharing and we can have a discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. These are some amazing projects, honestly. I do have a question regarding the Stadium of Qatar, though. You used the mashrabiya and traditional patterns in the lobby area that's close to the parametric approach, encouraging using ornaments in the design details. And when do you feel it is appropriate to use them? And what shapes or what references do you usually use to inspire the form of architecture in the Arab and Islamic world?
Well, we're quite eclectic. I mean, we are not historians, and so we look at images and books, and we do these kind of intuitive translations, like an artist would, through imitation, through manipulation, through because I think this works through intuitive sense of belonging into a region. So we're rarely very specific, whether it's, so the whole region has that flavor and feel, and the people also roaming around in that region. So that's the way we do it. We do it intuitively through a visual imitation, visual play. Nothing kind of, we don't believe in this case because it's anyway 21st century creation, an inspired creation. It's not, we don't look at particular features with particular meaning. So it's only a so I don't know if that makes sense. If we would, for instance, when it came to, of course, if you would use calligraphy, and in a mosque we use the Quran, and when it comes to it, if there were some particular sensitivities, we would bring in experts to help us. But to get the kind of vision off the ground, we just playing ourselves. Of course, we also have quite a few Arab speakers and people from the Middle East, Palestinians and Iraqi or Syrians in the office who help with checking that what we're doing makes sense to some extent.
I do believe we have another question from architect and planner Ibn Zubaydi.
Good evening, Mr. Patrik. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah. Good evening. Now our next question, we are asking about the parametricism theory.
Yeah.
What do you think, or how can you describe it? Is it different, or is it better for our cities, even though in our, in this situation that we are living now?
Well, you can see some of the projects. I mean, I think what the parametricism element comes in when you have, in particular, this latest stage of parametricism, which I call tectonism. So you can work with structures like domes or compression-only shells or skeletons where you use diagonals. A lot of this has structural efficiency. We're also looking at shading. So we could vary the shading. The openings are not, the pattern doesn't have to be totally even. We make them smaller and smaller when we go more south. So parametricism would be where you vary the patterns, where you adapt it to sun orientation, where the structure is also adapting to the load path, and where you can deviate from a very classical plan. So for instance, with the Pristina Mosque, we have a series of domes, but then they kind of taper and they form a kind of more fluid swarm, which also impacts individual pieces. So this adaptation, the advantage is that you don't have to work, you can work in an irregular site, you can work with a plan which isn't always symmetrical, and you can still do something harmonious and beautiful because you adapt with the soft geometry, you can adapt into a condition. So that is an advantage, and these advantages you can find, of course, in all cultures and all cities. So you can still, as this work shows, you can still adapt to the local, let's say, materials, to the climatic conditions with shading and overhang, roof overhangs, and you can use traditional forms, but they will be very much contemporary, very efficiently constructed. So when we do a dome, we might not use a sphere, we might use a parabolite form or inverted catenary form, which is more efficient. So for instance, in the Algiers project, we use a form finding process. We can make a very efficient dome, which also saves in some height. We don't have to be super high. We can make it slightly compressed and optimized through the ribbing. So it's still very beautiful, but it's optimized, more scientific than the traditional building. And you can be more, let's say, you can make also a dome over an irregular footprint and still make it look very balanced and beautiful because it is a naturally emerged form. So we also, in the sense, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Frei Otto.
Yeah, of course. Who
use kind of, if you use form finding methods where the material would self-equilibrate, find a force equilibrium that's very efficient. It also looks always very beautiful. And this is the kind of thing we can now simulate on the computer. So the advantage is that we can be more adaptive, versatile. We still sometimes, when we have no constraints on an open field, we can also use symmetry. So we're not rejecting symmetry. But what we always do is variation. So in Algiers, we have a symmetry, but we also have a strong variation of the sizes of these and proportions of these domes. So that is not something you wouldn't have in a classical building. And that's the difference between classical and parametricism.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrik.
Pleasure.
I believe Dima has a question.
Yeah, I have the next question. Hi, Mr. Patrik. It's good to have you here today. My question is, in a rapidly changing world, where do you see parametricism in the future?
Well, I think that the whole point of parametricism that is very adaptive, and it's not a kind of, it's a paradigm. So it has evolved already through a number of stages. The latest stage I call tectonism, because when we started, we were working with Maya and fluid forms, so we could make nice compositions. But now we are more rigorous using the way Frei Otto used form finding techniques, so we can have a more varied. We do, for instance, compression domes or tensile structures, or the combination of shells and tensile structures. And you can still use, there's beautiful research where you can do the kind of stone domes, and you can take any irregular form and you find a beautiful stone dome, your beautiful shell. So that's, I think, the future. And also we can now much more adapt for instance, when we do skeletons, we don't do a kind of repetitive pattern that wouldn't even make structural sense. The lower part of the building, you have to much stronger elements, and higher up you can be much less elements and thinner elements. So as a kind of gradation. So naturally, the contemporary science of engineering, if you would let it play out, naturally leads to something which belongs to parametricism, because it's a kind of parametric variation. So we use also this kind of form finding, so-called topology optimization, where you just input the loads and the foundation points, which might be also not exactly in a square, and then the system can give you various options of optimizing the load path, the way the skeleton develops. So these are the techniques which is contemporary computational civilization would want to use. So in a way, parametricism is basically adapting the architectural sensibility and design sensibility and stylistic sensibility to these conditions of contemporary science. So it's nearly it's not a kind of arbitrary invention. It's nearly kind of by necessity, a little bit like modernism was adapting the architectural style to the conditions of mass fabrication, where you can extrude I-beams and where you where you could work in concrete and with repetitive modular elements. That therefore modernism, and you where you didn't need to adhere to classical proportions, you can match more horizontal windows and so on. So modernism was a kind of logical expression of its era, of the technology of the era, but also of the social patterns of this era. And parametricism is the logical expression, nearly necessary expression, and there's many different versions of this, of the contemporary era. And as long as a civilization stays like this, because parametricism is also about urban concentration, about mixed use, so that we can make more complex composition, whereas modernism was about separating the different parts of the city, neatly separating, and each one very repetitive. So there are social and sociological and economic conditions to the style, and there's technological and scientific conditions. So both of these leading to parametricism. I'm just naming something which nearly is a kind of natural developed condition, and I'm making the rules and principles which we now work with explicit. So my role is one of interpreting and maybe canonizing and making explicit something which anyway would happen if we are open with our minds and thinking to the conditions of our time. We would lead to this, and that doesn't mean that we still can adapt regionally, of course. Even modernism tried that. Modernism was also, to some extent, I mean, it had less capacity to do so, but it also tried to do kind of regional versions of modernism. So we can have regional and culturally specific versions of parametricism, and that's what I try to show in this lecture.
You've done well. Okay, so the next question is from an educational point of view. Here we study modern architectural principles of the 20th century, and that fits the local economical status of the region. In your point of view, why do you think the professors are avoiding the use of parametric geometry in their students' work, and how can we make that idea of parametricism possible for students?
Well, okay. I mean, I don't know the mentality of the professors, but
I know that has happened to me personally.
I can understand. I mean, I actually have seen. I was on a student jury and a review in Saudi Arabia in our building where there was a kind of actually class was mixed male and female, and one was all female, and they were actually doing parametric work in Saudi Arabia, and that was quite sophisticated, and they knew what they were doing. It was a pleasure to interact, and so some of those professors were also younger professors were kind of very sympathetic. What I understand is, for instance, if what might worry the professors, first of all, that they themselves are not so familiar with this way of working, and it is violating what they have learned or deviating, and there is a lot more degrees of freedom in this work. So you can't tell somebody exactly what to do because you have many more options. There's only a set of abstract principles to observe, and that maybe might be unnerving because the student can do many more things, and that means also there's a risk of you doing something very subjective. And maybe when you initially come to this, you're just very playful with it and intuitive, and that could worry teachers. So they might worry that what you're doing makes not little sense. So the important thing is, therefore, for students, on the one hand, to learn the techniques. Grasshopper, for instance, I highly recommend. and to and visually understand the aesthetic which comes out of that. But you need to also read about the meaning of that. So you should read up on tectonism. You should read up on, for instance, this idea of why we might need more complexity in some of our institutions. So there should just be very simple forms. Maybe and that in particular in the more complex parametric projects, you have maybe overlapping spaces, you have multiple audiences, and you can add and subtract. So it's not a complete form. And how do you make a form which grows in stages, always look beautiful? That this is possible. So the reasoning why this makes sense. So you have to also, to satisfy the professor, you can't just be playful and intuitive. You also have to make an argument about your design. And I think that's the way to convince people. So if your design has structural optimization attached to it, if your design has a strong analysis of the institutional process, the program, the interactions, the spaces and their location, when you start there, have good reasons. And I think parametricism allows you to follow the good reasoning, because it's very flexible to follow, allow the form to follow the context and make the connections with the context, to allow the different interior spaces to be the size they would like to be, the relationships they would like to be. So you can have a lot of reasoning and argument with parametricism to explain your solution, and not say I love parametricism, I love free forms. No, you develop your argument from the needs of the institution. For instance, if you do a housing project, you say the families are not all the same. I can't repeat the same unit. I have to make many more variants, not only 3 types, but maybe I want to make 15 types. And that would lead, and then I want to order them in a certain time, and that will lead you. And also, I don't want to bulldoze this landscape. I'm following the topography, so I'm running up these units, softly up the hill and down the hill, and then I'm swinging around the tree. I don't tear out this tree because I want to have a straight line. So these moves make a lot of sense, and parametricism help you to do that. And then the project makes sense. You don't even have to mention parametricism. You just explain the advantages of these designs. And then the way you treat with the shading, that it's subtly different as you swing around the curve. The sun angle keeps changing, so the element must change to have the optimal shading. So these are all highly rational, good reasons for making the building more high performing, more adapted to social needs, to economic needs, to environmental needs. And if you do that with the full freedom of parametricism, you get a much more sophisticated and highly more rational scheme. When you then compare it to somebody who just wanted to do something very kind of strict and rectilinear, you realize that that you have many more advantages, and therefore your project is more sophisticated and needs to, and is let's say a more evolved project. And that's the way to convince the professors, because the professors don't want to just know what you like, what the student likes. They want to have good reasons presented to them, and I accept that, and I think parametricism can do that. Okay.
Now going to the next question. You mentioned the central bank in Iraq. Yeah. We would like to know from your perspective, what was what was the idea or the main concept behind it? We always read about the project, that it is like very sustainable. It is like the highest tower in Iraq or in Baghdad. So we want to know the idea, the concept that Zaha's thought of, especially that it is the only project that has been done in her homeland, Iraq.
Yeah, well, I think we're very proud of the design and the project. So and we had a lot of communications with the very kind of Gentile and wise and nice gentleman who was the central bank leader. So we understand a lot the process of the central bank, the requirements. We visited other central banks. But we also wanted to create something which is very strong. First of all, which was clear, it's not a glass box where you have kind of a big glass tower and lots of air conditioning and a mirror glass, like, you know, it's like a kind of somebody wearing shades and you can't see anything. And so we wanted something much more adaptive to this harsh climate. So that's one story, clearly. And what I like about it, for instance, here you have the building looks very different from different sides. From the back side, it looks very solid. From the front, it looks very, very open. And you can look into the building right there. So that's one thing. It becomes a more beautiful landmark because you can orient. If you had a cylinder, first of all, this adapts to the climate, but it also makes that very clear and visible. And then you can nearly use it as a guide, which direction is south, which direction is north in the city, and where you are relative to the tower, because it has. So I think a tower is always also a landmark which orients where you are in a city, and that kind of, and if it's rationally adapted to sun conditions, then it is a stronger, it nearly becomes like a compass in the city, automatically. So that's one thing. We wanted to give it an atrium because this connection across level is beautiful, and then you can see who's moving up and down, and it's such a beautiful location. So when you take the elevator up, you can kind of look over the river. So this was another idea. And then the podium, we have the idea of there's also a beautiful skylight and covered courtyard. So with a lot of nice light, and but you can see the tower when you're in the podium. So you know which way to go. So it's about orientation, about shading, about characterfulness. But also we took this idea of the tower is narrow at the base and then opens up. Because it's not a super tall tower, you can actually do that. And that's where you have higher levels, where you get more nicer views, you have larger floors. So that makes sense. And what is quite nice at the narrow base, we make it totally solid. So that's structurally very good, but also that's where we had, it also symbolizes that you have this is a special building. This actually has the cash walls and gold walls, and in Iraq, there's cash is still very important. I mean, for quite a while it will be. You will also have a very secure central bank. It's not only an administrative building. So I think that also, it makes sense. It makes it, even later on, if you don't have cash anymore, it becomes like a reminiscent of that, that you have. And you might still need secure spaces, for instance, for your servers, and there will always be in a bank the requirement for very secure spaces. I think I cannot hear you. Your voice is gone.
Hear me now?
Now I hear you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, going to the next question. Nowadays, all the news all over the world are highlighting that we will be living with the COVID-19 and we should deal with it. So from a planner perspective, how can we as planners deal with such a pandemic? I mean, how can we align this pandemic and any other future pandemics in our planning priorities?
Well, I mean, I'm more optimistic. I think eventually this pandemic will disappear and there will be a vaccine and we will forget about it. We had SARS, this one is maybe a little bit worse, but so yes. I wouldn't think that this long term will have a real big impact. But I think something else is coming out, becoming clear. That telecommunication can substitute for a lot of travel. And we discovered that working from home can work. So I think this experience and the investment which has been boosted into companies offering telecommunication tools, and how suddenly this became universally widespread, that will have some impact going forward, so that some of the work and communication patterns will be less face-to-face, less travel, and that will have an impact on urbanization, I think. So we don't know yet what exact impact will be. That it could, to some extent, allow for, we had for the last 3 decades, we had a shift back, an urban renaissance, where people moved out of the suburb into the centers. And that generated a lot of super high prices in the centers. And that hampered that of those who wanted to come couldn't come. So I think some of this might not continue. So the suburbs could be viable because there will be some type of workers who can live there and work there and maybe commute very rarely, once a week, and that's something very different than commuting once every day. So that will take some of the pressure off. Some of the office space might be converted to residential space. I think it will still be attractive to live in a city, but since some people don't have to, that makes space for others who wanted to come in to come in. So that's what I believe. And I believe if we have a relatively free market and less planning restrictions, we need to allow now the market to discover these new patterns. So for instance, if you want to work from home, that you're actually allowed to have a workspace where you even can have a colleague coming in and maybe even an employee, and you extend your home a little bit and it becomes a kind of live-work condition. So we might find these kind of hybrid conditions. Maybe some of people will avoid public transport. They will be more wanting to walk. We have now a lot of these e-bikes in London and e-mobility. So we might have less public transport, less buses, and more cycling, and more walkability. So that will transform our cities. Active traveling is also much more healthy. And if we clear out some of the buses and have, I did a study on walkable London before the pandemic. If we make some lines through the city totally pedestrian, a lot of more people wouldn't mind to walk for half an hour, 45 minutes, rather than sitting in a car for an hour. So, and maybe not in your region so much, but maybe cycling with e-bikes might even be a thing which could work in the Arab world, because you don't have to sweat. You can kind of elegantly drive and you get the nice wind. And in the taking off here, so I think that will lead to two competing tendencies. They might happen at the same time: suburbanization, as well as a new type of urbanization based on walkability and electromobility. And that might mean a lot of conversions of office space to residential spaces, or to live workspace, to co-working spaces as well. And what I'm saying is this: the planners should observe and facilitate and let the market play out. What I'm worried about, that the planners get in the way and trying to do too many rules and regulations and think they can guide the process, but they don't know. And oftentimes they ignore market signals, price signals. I've been a critic of that for a long time, and I don't think you can come in, let's say, for instance, when the housing crisis in many major cities, this was generated by planners preventing a lot of development, and then facing the crisis, the politicians come in and take 50% of all new product and distribute it and ration it out and subsidize it. I think that's not something I would hope. So my emphasis here is that there will be quite a lot of changes, and the planners need to be stepping back, in my view, and letting developers, entrepreneurs, and the market forces discover the new ways of working and living.
Thank you for your response. Unfortunately, we have less than 5 minutes. We're going to take the last question to Architect Dima.
That's okay.
Okay, hi. So my question is, we all know that Zaha studied mathematics in Beirut before moving to London to study architecture. And you yourself studied mathematics and philosophy in your early life before shifting to architecture. So my question is, why did you make this shift, and how did studying architecture how did studying mathematics, affect your theories and work style? And if you could go back in time, would you get into this field at all? Yeah, 3 questions.
Well, actually, I mean, mathematics, philosophy. I mean, what I got out of that at the time. I mean, first of all, analytic thinking, and it brought me actually for Zaha was the interest in geometry, and for me it was also that, but also the interest in computation and logic, which connects up with computation. So that was the interest, but philosophy was also, you know, important because to step away from the direct pragmatic issues and get an overview about what's important in life. About, you know, my philosophy was also interested in social philosophy and political theory and history. So to get an overview of where civilization is going, and what has been the historical development, and how might the history develop further, and what would be enhancing for prosperity and well-being in terms of social process, living together. And I think that's important also for architects to understand what tendencies in society, which institutions or which kind of city building they would want to promote and would want to be part of. So I think that's important. And architects, different, you know, engineers are more focused, directly pragmatic on problems which they get put in front of them in daily life through the architect. Of course, there's also science innovators in engineering, but in the daily routine, it's the architect who is confronted with a problem, with an issue, and usually it might be a new issue, a new site, a new country, a new institution, a competition where you don't get a lot of prescription, and where you're allowed to think anew. What a building, a major public building, for instance, how it should represent, for instance, art, and how it should present a new 21st century public. So these are quite ambitious challenges, and for that to have an understanding of what it means for society to develop a kind of hub of communication, and its importance of that, and what it should represent and how it should work. We are involved in that, so that's why philosophy is a very good study. And I know many architects who didn't study philosophy academically, but anyway end up reading a lot of philosophy books. So all the architectural theorists should do that to some extent. They should be aware of what's going on they will read philosophy, but they will also read sociology, political science, and have a general current affairs awareness, and develop an opinion about where society should develop. So that's very important for architects. So I think, yes, I think philosophy has come into architecture anyway. That doesn't require me to do that. That's happening anyway. And it doesn't require a formal academic study of philosophy. And philosophy is something which has a larger audience than an academic circle, by the way.
Would you study architecture and if you had known what you know now?
Yes, I'm fascinated. I would do it, because what I like about architecture, as I said, it has this ambitiousness. It has, in terms of thinking through social institutions, but also it has something artistic. And it's you're not only working with your pen or with your mouth. You're creating something, so that's satisfying, and it's also business. I like I wouldn't have wanted to be totally academic only. So I like also the business aspect, the aspect of organizing, people into forging an organization, the way we developed Zaha Hadid Architects together with Zaha. This entrepreneurial building an organization and having a business is also fascinating to me, because I think that makes it special.
Thank you.
I think many philosophy by itself is fascinating, but maybe it would be less diverse in its challenges.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for the attention, and that you held out so long. So I hope that we had an audience. I don't know.
Yes, unfortunately.
And you can put this might end up online, so you get even a larger audience. So thanks a lot, guys, for inviting me. It was good chat, and thanks for the challenges, all questions, the interesting questions. So
thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.
This has been a lovely, informative lecture, but unfortunately our time is up. Patrik, we would like to thank you plenty for this opportunity. We'd love to have you again sometime, hopefully next time in person. And thank you for architects Dima and architect Iba for your presence with us today. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for more lectures and be sure to follow us on our social media accounts. We are the Arcnode team, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Goodbye, everyone.